Bonjour et bienvenue à la Citadelle. Je m'appelle Nathalie Babin-Dufresne.
Hello,
Je suis
and welcome
directrice
to
des
the Citadelle.
communications ici
I am
à
Director
Rideau
of
et je serai votre
Communications
maître
at
des
Rideau
cérémonies.
Hall. I will be your Master of
C'est un
Ceremonies.
honneur d'être ici
It is an
parmi vous
honor to be
aujourd'hui.
here with you today.
Notre photographe officiel.
Our official photographer will take photos that will be shared with you in the coming days.
Demande donc de ne pas prendre des photos.
I would ask you not to take photo or video during the ceremony.
Maintenant, veuillez
Now,
vous assurer que vos
please ensure
sont éteints.
your phones are turned off.
Nous comprenons qu'aujourd'hui,
We understand that today
certains
can be a difficult day for some of you.
noter que nous avons
Please note
de soutien
that we have mental health support workers ready to help guests who need it.
Avant de commencer,
Before beginning, I would like to introduce Mr. Alexander Mackenzie from Metsimikush Shefferville, who will play the drum for the arrival of His Holiness and Her Excellency. Thank you, everyone.
hello and welcome to the Citadel. My name is Nathalie Babin-Dufresne. I'm Director of Communications at Rideau Hall, and I'll be your Masters of Ceremony. It's an honor to be here with you today. As our official photographer will be taking photos, which will be shared with you in the coming days, I would ask that you not take any photos or videos during the ceremony. At this time, I would also ask that you ensure that your cell phones are turned off. We understand that today might be difficult for some guests, and please note that we have some mental health support workers ready to assist guests in need of support. I would now like to introduce Alexandre Mackenzie from Matsumakush-Shefferville to play drum as we welcome His Holiness and Her Excellency. Thank you. Je vous invite à vous lever.
I invite you to stand, if you can, to welcome His Holiness Pope Francis, Their Excellencies, and the Prime
I
Minister.
invite you to please rise, if you are able, and welcome His Holiness Pope Francis, Their Excellencies, and the Prime Minister.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome everybody here, the Prime Minister, Pope Francis. People stay alive. And I would like to welcome Mary Simone. I'd just like to ask everybody to remember our people that have passed. Today I'd like to remember the children that has passed, that did not come home, and I would like to pray for the survivors.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Veuillez vous asseoir. Please be seated. Au nom de leurs excellences, la très honorable Mary,
On behalf of Their Excellencies,
je vous souhaite,
Mary Simon and Whit Fraser, I'd like to welcome you to the ceremony.
Excellencies, the Right Honorable Barry Simon and Mr. Whit Fraser, I welcome you to this ceremony. Just prior to the beginning of the ceremony, a traditional Inuit lamp known as the Qulliq was lit to mark this important day. Traditionally, the Qulliq was lit by Inuit women to bring warmth and light to their home. Today, we are grateful for Olipika Rebecca Vivi from Nunavut, who will tend the Qulliq throughout the ceremony. Nous allumons le Qulliq, la lampe.
We light the Qulliq, the traditional Inuit lamp, during important events like today's ceremony. This lamp is used in the north to bring light and warmth to the home.
Pour commencer, j'aimerais
To begin, I'd like to invite an elder from the Huron-Wendat
I would like to
Nation.
invite Elder Raymond Gros-Louis of the Huron-Wendat First Nations to offer words of welcome.
On va rester assis.
We will remain seated. However, I'll ask you something special.
Vous savez, avec la
You know,
pandémie qui s'est passée,
with the pandemic,
des choses qui ont changé dans nos
a lot of things changed in our ceremonies,
s'adapter.
and we had no choice but to adapt.
J'aimerais ça que je vais commencer à allumer la sauge,
When I light
faire mon lien avec
the sweetgrass and make my link with the four
je vais
directions,
aller porter au pape François
and when I bring the sweetgrass to Pope Francis, and a feather from a wild turkey, which is an element of survival for the Wendat on the land.
cette plume et
So I will give him that sweetgrass and the feather.
il va servir
Sweetgrass
il va purifier par l'odorat.
purifies through the smell, through the sense of smell. I know Pope Francis has a little bit of difficulty with smoke,
Beaucoup de façons.
so we have many ways of conducting a ceremony and to adapt. And I think it's important that Pope Francis receives this sweetgrass and this feather to participate
Aux quatre directions.
in the smudge to the four directions.
Représentant Wendat et
I'll introduce myself in Wendat.
Awiti Nowencio, Onyontero, Chiati Andisha Wenandui, Chiati Mongolui, Chiati Anaharisqua, Wendat Ndi Wanda Keindari. Ça fait pas longtemps que j'ai réappris.
I didn't relearn my language until recently. I don't know it all,
Pour moi, c'est beaucoup.
but even being able to introduce myself counts for a lot.
Ma langue,
Because when I introduce myself in my language, I'm not just speaking on my behalf, but on behalf of my whole nation.
donc je vais me lever, je vais aller.
So I will rise.
On a quelque chose en commun, et vous vous promenez avec votre.
We have something in common. You have your wheelchair, and I've got my walker.
Donc, Pape François, c'est une plume de dinde sauvage.
Pope Francis, here is a feather from a wild turkey. This is very important for our nation on the land.
Et je vais vous mettre le foin d'odeur.
And here's the sweet grass. It smells very good, by the way.
Que je vais faire le. Oui, vous pouvez la sortir.
Yes, you can take it. You can take it with the feather.
Voyez, voyez. Et on va faire un cercle virtuel.
We'll do a virtual circle.
La pandémie,
You know, with the pandemic,
vidéo là, ça sert.
we use video,
Je m'étais aperçu que
and I noticed
si on n'est pas en présence,
that even when we're not in person,
à partir de l'esprit.
we can do things in spirit.
Ouvrir un cercle ici.
And we'll open a circle here today in spirit.
Et à partir de ce cercle, on va
And
visualiser
from that circle, we can visualize a sacred fire.
le feu sacré,
Because sacred fire
tout ce qui existe dans la création.
unites everything that exists in creation.
On va mettre du tabac virtuel.
So we'll put virtual tobacco in that fire as
En
well.
même temps, on va honorer les quatre éléments,
And we will
l'eau, le feu, l'air.
honor earth, wind, water, and fire.
On honorer aussi l'aspect
We will honor
minéral.
the mineral aspect, the vegetable aspect, and the human aspect.
Je vais demander à la
I will ask the
d'ouvrir sa
east direction to open its door
porte.
so we can have access to that direction.
Demander à la direction du sud.
I will ask the southern direction to open its door as well.
Sa direction.
To have access to that direction, I will ask the western direction
D'ouvrir cette porte.
to open that door,
Porte des grands-mères.
the grandmother door.
On va honorer la direction du nord.
We'll honor the northern direction,
Les grands-pères.
the direction
Aussi, je vais
of grandfathers.
spéciale pour les Inuits.
And then also, it's special for the Inuit because they are a minority within a minority. It's easy to forget them, but it's important to think of them.
Commencer avec le Qulliq.
And I'm pleased that she began with the Qulliq, which I am also familiar with. So it's an honor to have the Inuit culture here as well.
Et je vais ouvrir les 4 directions
I'll open the 4 directions.
4 fois.
I will whistle 4 times. This is a wild turkey bone I've had for about 20 years, and I use it in my ceremonies.
Avant de le faire, j'aimerais ça que
And before I do that,
sur votre cœur.
I'd like for you to put your hands on your heart, each one of you.
Le cœur, ça peut servir de bâton de parole en même temps.
The heart can be like a talking stick,
La sagesse aux humains.
but that's where the Creator put wisdom in humans.
Allez se rappeler.
And we often need to remind ourselves of this. It's an important gesture
À cette sagesse.
to connect ourselves with that wisdom.
Je demande à la grand-mère de l'Ouest
I asked the Western grandmother
de rendre accès au
to give us
sacré en
access to the sacred circle of spirits
joindre avec nous.
so they can be with us,
Gens unis.
so we can be united and stronger together.
C'est à moi, grand-père, grand-père François. Oh. Merci.
Thank you. Merci. Aimez-vous. J'aimerais maintenant inviter
I'd like to now invite the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau to say a few words.
Honorable Justin Trudeau to say a few words.
Chers aînés,
Dear elders,
Vivi,
Raymond, Vivi,
dirigeants autochtones,
Indigenous leaders, Most Holy Father, Excellencies, Premier Legault,
d'être ici
I'm very pleased to be with you here today and to be able to say a few opening words.
à remercier les premiers
I would like to begin by thanking the First Nations
territoires
who have occupied this territory for millennia for welcoming us to their traditional and treaty lands.
As we welcome His Holiness this week, it's important to reflect on the significance of this moment for survivors, for Indigenous peoples, and indeed for all Canadians. Hier, le 26 juillet
Yesterday, July 26th,
de Sainte
was the feast of Saint Anne. Saint Anne is an important figure for Catholics.
représente,
She represents maternal love,
elle représente aussi
and she also represents family.
la famille,
Family
c'est nos racines.
is our roots.
C'est ce qui nous aide
It is what helps us to grow and to discover the world.
La famille,
And family
c'est la première chose
is the first thing
aux enfants.
that was taken away from the children who were sent to residential schools.
J'ai visité de Kamloops,
When I visited Kamloops, Cowessess, and Williams Lake,
parle avec les
when I talk with survivors and with families,
je pense aux enfants,
I think of the children
je pense aussi aux parents.
and I think of the parents too.
As a dad, I can't imagine my kids being taken away. When my kids are crying, I can console them. When they're happy, I can share that feeling of joy with them, of accomplishment. But in residential schools, these children were alone and isolated in their pain and sorrow, far from their families and communities, and even worse, stripped of their language, their culture, their identity. Une solitude profonde. Perte non seulement
Deep
de
solitude, loss of family and community, and also of their language, their culture, and their identity.
Depuis la publication en
Since the 2015 release of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's final report, the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis have been calling on the Pope to apologize to survivors, to their families, and to communities,
des excuses pour
to apologize for the role that the Roman Catholic Church as an institution played in the abuse,
spirituel,
the spiritual abuse, cultural abuse,
émotionnel,
emotional abuse,
physique,
physical abuse,
sexuel
and sexual abuse
que les enfants autochtones
of Indigenous children
dirigent.
in church-run residential schools.
L'événement de cette semaine
This week's event at Musqueam would not have been possible without the courage and perseverance
survivants
of the survivors who shared their painful memories and experiences, including directly with the Holy Father himself.
Your Holiness, in our previous conversations, from the first time we spoke about this, you always offered your time, genuinely seeking to understand, to do right, and to atone. This week, you recognized the abuses experienced at residential schools that resulted in cultural destruction, loss of life, and ongoing traumas lived by Indigenous peoples in every region of the country. As Your Holiness has said, begging pardon is not the end of the matter. It is a starting point, a first step. On Monday morning, I was sitting with survivors, and I felt their reaction to your apology. Each will take from it what they need, but there's no doubt that you had an enormous impact. Survivors and their descendants need to be at the center of everything we do going forward. In April, Dene National Chief Gerald Antoine was at the Vatican, and he compared the moment to the experience of walking through the snow and seeing fresh moose tracks. It was a feeling of hope. Today, I want to say, let's all continue our work together to keep this hope alive. Quand je suis allé au Vatican, il y a
When I went to the Vatican 5 years ago now, I was there to discuss residential schools and reconciliation with Your Holiness.
sais que votre
And I know that your presence here this week
n'aurait pas été possible
would not have been possible without your personal convictions
votre intégrité.
and your integrity. Thank you
Venu avec le
for coming with an open heart.
On reconnaît tous
We all recognize
que le système des pensionnats,
that the residential school system attempted to assimilate Indigenous children.
les peuples autochtones
Today, Indigenous peoples continue to fight to defend and preserve their cultures and languages.
le rassemblement
The
traditionnel
traditional gathering that took place in Musqueam is a very good example.
la réconciliation
Reconciliation is the responsibility of us all.
c'est notre
It
responsabilité
is our responsibility to see our differences not as a barrier, but as an opportunity to learn, to better understand each other, and to take action.
Our Governor General talks often about how reconciliation is not a single act, but a lifetime journey of healing. This journey is different for everyone. I spoke about Saint Anne being a symbol of maternal love and family, but Saint Anne is also a symbol of healing. Tomorrow, Your Holiness will visit Saint Anne de Beaupré. Pilgrims have been traveling there for centuries to pray and to ask Saint Anne to help them heal. So in the spirit of healing, let us never give up. Canadians, institutions, let us continue our work together with Indigenous peoples until we reach a better future for everyone. Merci. Thank you. Gracias. Tiens wek. Merci.
Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
J'invite Son Excellence
I invite Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, Governor General of Canada, to take the floor.
I would now ask the Governor General, Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, to offer her address.
Bonjour.
Hello.
Hello and good afternoon. Unnusakut Kwe. Votre Sainteté, je vous
Welcome, Your Holiness,
bienvenue à la
to
Citadelle.
the Citadel.
Welcome, Your Holiness, to the Citadel of Quebec. My husband, Whit, and I are honored to welcome you and to be joined by survivors, elders, leaders, knowledge keepers, diplomats, dignitaries, former commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and all of those watching from coast to coast to coast. I want to thank the First Nations who have occupied this territory for millennia for welcoming me to their traditional and treaty lands. Peu importe de vous
Regardless of where you are listening from, either here at the Citadel or elsewhere in Canada, you are on Indigenous land. It is important to acknowledge this.
Your Holiness, thank you for making this visit to Canada on what you have called your pilgrimage of penance. We gather at this historic citadel where stories are shared and ideas are exchanged. With this visit, you're signaling to the world that you and the Roman Catholic Church are joining us on our path of reconciliation, healing, hope, and renewal. It began in Masquatrit, where we witnessed two realities. The first was the hurt and pain of survivors, communities of people who suffered for decades, Indigenous peoples forced to live with policies meant to strip away their cultures, languages, and spiritual beliefs and practices. Survivors who every day carry the trauma of their residential school experience. But these people, these survivors, they defy definition. They are parents who defended their children when no one else would. They are advocates who fought and are still fighting for their languages and cultures so that they can thrive for generations to come. They are artists who are channeling their stories through their music, dance, cultures, and language. They are all proud. They are all strong. Your Holiness, they came to hear what you had to say with hearts and minds open, some willing to forgive, some still living with the hurt, but all willing to listen. Everyone hoping to further their healing journey. Les peuples autochtones
Indigenous peoples showed the world and continue to show us that despite the challenges they may face, they will face them with dignity and great resolve.
I acknowledge and applaud what has been achieved, what Indigenous communities have achieved with this week's visit. It is Indigenous peoples who worked, waited, and prayed for an apology on Indigenous lands in Canada. They never gave up. We must remember that it is because of their courage and resilience that we are here today. Your Holiness, their efforts make Canada a stronger nation. Sa pililaw si mangimata ilinyariak titaw hatta si mayubini taman na aninak si mayok atuktaw si maninga tukisiyaw tigaswak sugu. Itsirak juakapig how you maniakotit, nunahakasimayuit, kanatamik, nukihaktisimmata. It is our collective duty to remember what happened at residential schools, to tell the stories of survivors and of those who never made it home, and to support and care for those who did. Support in terms of mental health resources, helping families discover the true fate of those who never made it home, and care for Indigenous peoples who need the time and space to process what this visit means to them and what the next step should be. As you indicated, Your Holiness, this is an important step towards further dialogue and actions that will lead to real reconciliation. Indeed, we look forward to hearing more of the Church's future actions to continue this essential work. On Monday, you visited the Sacred Heart Church of the First Peoples in Edmonton. There, you said that reconciliation is a grace that must be sought. To that, I would also add that reconciliation is a grace that must be earned through continuous hard work and understanding. That work falls to each and every one of us, our sacred responsibility.
There is a time for everything. We are ready.
In Canada, there has been a monumental shift in our thinking. Now is the time in our country's history and consciousness for reconciliation. As we address this issue and the future health and well-being of Indigenous communities, I put my faith in each of us to encourage healing. In Inuktitut, to heal, Mamisagnak. Mamisagnak is a journey.
Mamisagnak is a healing form, a form of healing.
Softly and carefully. It follows its own path, carrying us forward, but also in many other directions.
In Inuktitut, to heal is Mamisagnik. Mamisagnik is a journey, not a destination.
This Mamisagnak means healing, to walk towards healing.
Carefully.
For everyone to be involved and to walk together towards healing, towards reconciliation.
Also in many other directions.
Eventually, healing takes us beyond powerlessness or anger or pain. It takes us beyond trauma. It renews our mental, spiritual, and physical health. I've seen this in action. I've seen healing through art, through community, through kindness, through generosity, through the revitalization of language, culture, and identity. Your Holiness, long after you leave Canada, I know you will continue listening and learning not only about the struggles and pains of these communities, but also about the pride they feel to be Indigenous, their resilience, and how they contribute to Canada and the world. Take these stories back with you, share them widely, and continue to find ways to work together to extend a hand to heal our communities. I have great hope in what I have seen so far during this visit. Canada looks forward to working with the Holy See on reconciliation, as well as many other pressing global issues such as promoting peace and education, breaking down barriers, fighting poverty and disease, and rebuilding trust. Thank you for your efforts. And thank you to all Canadians for hearing and responding to the call for reconciliation. Merci à tous.
Thank you to all Canadians for hearing and responding to the call for reconciliation.
Kanata miulimanik nakok mehunga
I want to thank all Canadians for listening and for hearing our effort, our call to work together, to come together, to unite in this very important cause.
May the Creator bless us all. Merci, miigwech, nakokmik, koyanamik.
Thank you, Excellency. I would now invite His Holiness Pope Francis to share his address. J'invite maintenant Sa Sainteté.
I would now invite His Holiness Pope Francis to give his speech.
Señora Gobernadora General,
Madam Governor General, Mr. Prime Minister,
distinguidas autoridades civiles,
distinguished civil and religious authorities,
llamados representantes de los
dear representatives of the Indigenous Peoples,
distinguidos miembros del cuerpo diplomático,
honorable members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen.
los saludo cordialmente.
I cordially greet you and I thank
Simon,
Her Excellency, the Right Honorable Mary Simon, and His Excellency Justin Trudeau for their kind words.
me complace dirigirme a ustedes
I am happy to be able to address you who have the responsibility of serving the people of this great country that, from sea to sea, displays an extraordinary natural heritage.
entre las muchas bellezas
Among its many beauties, I think of the immense and spectacular maple forests that make the Canadian countryside uniquely colorful and variegated.
me gustaría inspirarme en el símbolo
I would like to take as my starting point the symbol par excellence of these lands, the maple leaf, which, starting with the seal of Quebec, rapidly spread to become the emblem that appears on the national flag.
aunque esto haya sucedido en tiempos bastante recientes.
That development took place in relatively recent times, but the maple trees preserve the memory of many past generations, going back well before the colonists arrived on Canadian soil. The native peoples extracted maple sap with which they concocted wholesome and healthy syrups. This makes us think of their industriousness and their constant concern to protect the land and the environment, in keeping with a harmonious vision of creation as an open book that teaches human beings to love the Creator and to live in symbiosis with other living creatures.
Mucho que aprender de esto.
We can learn much from this ability to listen attentively to God, to persons, and to nature.
Necesitamos especialmente
And we need it, especially amid the dizzying and frenzied pace of today's world, marked by a constant rapidification, which makes difficult a truly human, sustainable, and integral development, and ends up creating a society of weariness and disillusionment, a society that finds it hard to recover the taste for contemplation, authentic relationships, and the mystique of togetherness.
cuánta necesidad tenemos
We have such a need to listen to each other and to dialogue with one another in order to step back from the prevailing individualism, from hasty judgments, widespread aggressiveness, and the temptation to divide the world into good people and bad.
que absorben el aire.
The large maple leaves, which absorb polluted air and in turn give out oxygen, invite us to marvel at the beauty of creation and to appreciate the wholesome values present in the Indigenous cultures.
Son una inspiración
They can inspire us all
y nos pueden ayudar
and help
a sanar
to heal
los dañinos hábitos,
harmful tendencies to exploit
explotar la creación,
to exploit not only creation, but also time and relationships,
vida humana únicamente.
and to base human activity solely on what proves useful and profitable.
Sin embargo, estas lecciones vitales
These vital teachings, however, were violently opposed in the past.
pienso especialmente
I think, above all,
de asimilación
of the policies of assimilation and enfranchisement,
que incluían el sistema
which also involved the residential school system
a muchas
and which harmed many Indigenous families by undermining their language, their culture,
del mundo.
and their worldview.
En ese deplorable
In that deplorable system promoted by the government authorities of the time,
separó a tanto
which separated so many children from their families,
involucradas varias instituciones
different local Catholic institutions played a part.
vergüenza y dolor.
For this reason, I express my deep shame and sorrow, and together with the bishops of this country,
De perdón
I renew my request for forgiveness for the wrong done by so many Christians to the Indigenous peoples.
por todo esto pido perdón.
I beg forgiveness.
Trágico cuando algunos creyentes
It is tragic when some believers, as happened in that period of history,
sino a las conveniencias
conform themselves to the conventions of the world rather than to the gospel.
un papel esencial
The Christian faith has played an essential role in shaping the highest ideals of Canada, characterized by the desire to build a better country for all of its people.
necesario, admitiendo las propias
But at the same time, it is necessary, in admitting our faults, to work together to accomplish a goal that I know all of you share: to promote the legitimate rights of the native populations and to favor processes of healing and reconciliation between them and the non-Indigenous people in the country.
compromiso
This is reflected in the commitment to respond in a fitting way to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
en vuestra atención
It is also reflected in your concern to acknowledge the rights of Native peoples.
la Santa Sede y las comunidades católicas
The Holy See and the local Catholic communities are concretely committed to promoting Indigenous cultures
caminos espirituales
in specific and appropriate spiritual ways that include attention to their cultural traditions, customs, languages, and educational processes in the spirit of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
es nuestro deseo
It is our desire to renew the relationship between the Church and the Indigenous peoples of Canada, a relationship marked both by a love that has borne outstanding fruit and, tragically,
que nos estamos
deep wounds that we are committed to understanding and healing.
muy agradecido por
I am truly grateful to have encountered and listened to various representatives of the Indigenous peoples in recent months in Rome,
poder afianzar aquí
and to be able, here in Canada, to renew the good relations established there.
los momentos que vivimos juntos
The time we spent together
una huella
made an impression on me.
y han dejado el firme deseo de responder
They left me with a firm desire to respond to the indignation and shame for the suffering endured by the Indigenous peoples
camino fraternal
and to move forward on a fraternal and patient journey with all Canadians
justicia
in accordance with truth and justice,
sanación
working toward healing and reconciliation, and constantly inspired by hope.
aquella historia de dolor y de
That history of suffering and contempt, the fruit of the colonizing mentality,
sana fácilmente.
does not heal easily.
Al mismo tiempo nos advierte
Indeed,
que la colonización
it should make us realize that colonization has not ended.
se transforma
In many places, it has been transformed, disguised, and concealed.
el caso de la colonización
This is the case with forms of ideological colonization.
la mentalidad
In the past, the colonialist mentality
de la vida concreta
disregarded the concrete life of people and imposed certain predetermined cultural models.
¿no? Y
Yet today, too, there are a number of forms of ideological colonization that clash with the reality of life, stifle the natural attachment of peoples to their values, and attempt to uproot their traditions, history, and religious ties. This mentality, presumptuously thinking that the dark pages of history have been left behind, becomes open to what is called cancel culture, that would judge the past purely on the basis of certain contemporary categories. The result is a cultural fashion that levels everything out, makes everything equal, proves intolerant of differences, and concentrates on the present moment, on the needs and rights of individuals, while frequently neglecting their duties with regard to the most weak and vulnerable of our brothers and sisters, the poor, migrants, the elderly, the sick, the unborn. They are the forgotten ones in affluent societies. They are the ones who, amid general indifference, are cast aside like dry leaves to be burnt. Instead, the rich, multicolored foliage of the maple tree reminds us of the importance of the whole, the importance of developing human communities that are not blandly uniform, but truly open and inclusive. And just as every leaf is fundamental for the luxuriant foliage of the branches, so each family, as the essential cell of society, is to be given its due, because the future of humanity passes through the family. The family is the first concrete social reality, yet it is threatened by many factors: domestic violence, the frenetic pace of labor, an individualistic mindset, cutthroat careerism, unemployment, the loneliness and isolation of young people, the abandonment of the elderly and the infirm. The Indigenous peoples have much to teach us about the care and protection of the family. Among them, from an early age, children learn to recognize right from wrong, to be truthful, to share, to correct mistakes, to begin anew, to comfort one another, and to be reconciled. May the wrongs that were endured by the Indigenous peoples that we are ashamed of today serve as a warning to us, lest concern for the family and its rights be neglected for the sake of greater productivity and individual interests. Let us return to the maple leaf. In wartime, soldiers used those leaves for bandages and to soothe wounds. Today, before the senseless folly of war, there is once again a need to heal from forms of hostility and extremism and to cure the wounds of hatred. A witness of tragic acts of violence in the past recently observed that peace has its own secret, which is never to hate anyone. If we want to live, we must never hate. There is no need to divide the world into friends and enemies, to create distances. An arms race and strategies of deterrence will not bring peace and security. We need to ask ourselves not how to pursue wars, but how to stop them, and to prevent entire peoples from once more being held hostage in the grip of terrible and protracted Cold Wars. What we need are creative and far-sighted policies capable of moving beyond the categories of opposition in order to provide answers to global challenges. In fact, the great challenges of our day, like peace, climate change, the effects of the pandemic, and international migration movements, all have one thing in common. They are global.
retos globales.
They are global challenges. They concern everyone.
Hablan de la necesidad
And since all of them speak of the need to consider the whole, politics cannot remain confined to partisan interests.
como enseña la sabiduría.
We must be able to look, as Indigenous wisdom tradition teaches, 7 generations ahead, and not to our immediate convenience, to the next election, or the support of this or that lobby group.
Justicia y paz de la
But we need also to appreciate the yearning of young people for fraternity, justice, and peace.
sabiduría es necesaria.
In order to preserve memory and wisdom, we need to listen to the elderly. But in order to press forward towards the future, we also need to embrace the dreams of young people.
Mejor que el que
They deserve a better future than the one we are preparing for them. They deserve to be involved in decisions about the building of the world of today and tomorrow, particularly about the protection of our common home. In this regard, the values and teachings of the Indigenous peoples are precious. Here, I would like to express appreciation for the praiseworthy commitment being made at the local level to protecting the environment. It could even be said that the symbols drawn from nature, such as the fleur de lys in the flag of this province of Quebec and the maple leaf in the country's flag, confirm Canada's ecological vocation.
Cuando la comisión correspondiente evaluó
When the Commission for the creation of the Canadian flag set about evaluating the thousands of sketches submitted for that purpose, many of them presented by ordinary people, it proved surprising that almost all of them contained the image of the maple leaf.
este símbolo compartido
The convergence around this shared symbol leads me to bring up an essential word for all Canadians:
culturalismo.
multiculturalism.
Este está en la base de la cohesión.
Multiculturalism is fundamental for the cohesiveness of a society as diverse as the dappled colors of the foliage of the maple trees. With its multiple points and sides, the maple leaf reminds us of a polyhedron. It tells us that you are people capable of inclusion, such that new arrivals can find a place in that multiform unity and make their own original contribution to it.
El multiculturalismo es un reto permanente.
Multiculturalism is a permanent challenge. It involves accepting and embracing all the different elements present, while at the same time respecting their diverse traditions and cultures, and never thinking that the process is complete.
Y en este sentido,
In this regard, I express my appreciation for the generosity shown in accepting many Ukrainian and Afghan migrants.
también es necesario trabajar para superar la
Yet there is also a need to move beyond the rhetoric of fear with regard to immigrants and to give them, according to the country's possibilities, the concrete opportunity to become involved responsibly in society.
democracia son indispensables.
For this to happen, rights and democracy are indispensable. But it is also necessary to confront the individualistic mindset and to remember that life in common is based on presuppositions that the political system cannot produce on its own. Here, too, Indigenous culture is of great help in recalling the importance of social values.
Iglesia católica con
The Catholic Church, with its universal dimension, its concern for the most vulnerable,
servicio a favor
its
de la
rightful service to human life at every moment of its existence, from conception to natural death, is happy to offer its specific contribution.
En estos últimos días he sabido
In these days,
personas
I have heard about the many needy people who come knocking on the doors of parishes.
incluso en un país tan
Even in a country as developed and prosperous as Canada,
dedica mucha atención
which pays great attention to social assistance,
un poco los indigentes
there are many homeless people who turn to churches and food banks to receive essential help in meeting their needs, which, lest we forget, are not only material.
Los hermanos y hermanas
These brothers and sisters of ours spur us to reflect on the urgent need for efforts to remedy the radical injustice that taints our world.
causa de la cual
because of which the abundant gifts of creation are unequally distributed. It is scandalous that the well-being generated by economic development does not benefit all sectors of society. And it is sad that precisely among Native peoples we often find high rates of poverty, along with other negative indicators, such as a low percentage of schooling and less than easy access to housing and to health care. May the emblem of the maple leaf, which regularly appears on the labels of this country's products, serve as an incentive to everyone to make economic and social decisions that foster participation and care for those in need. It is by working in common accord, hand in hand, that today's pressing challenge must be faced. I thank you for your hospitality, your attention, your respect, and with sincere affection, I assure you that Canada and its people are truly close to my heart. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Holiness. Au nom de leurs excellences,
On behalf of their excellencies, I would like to thank you all for your presence here today. And to close this ceremony, the Métis violinists, Alicia and Liam Bloor, brother and sister from Toronto, will accompany the departure of the official delegation.
Thank you for attending today's gathering. As the official party departs, they will be accompanied by Métis fiddling duo Alicia and Liam Bloor, siblings from Toronto. Thank you. Merci. Na Qulliq.